So today's topic for our caregiver support group meeting is quick tips for self-management. Um, I created this title with the intention of trying to share some practical ideas, but as I was thinking about this, the topic kind of evolved into something a little bit more than quick tips. But in review, this is the information that we shared about self-care for caregivers several sessions ago, and I don't think anything that is on this list is necessarily new or unfamiliar for anyone who is joining us. We know that self-care is such an important part of a caregiver's ability to be there both for themselves and also for their loved one. And at the same time, we also can appreciate that sometimes it can be really hard to access these pieces. Just as a reminder, um, it is important to take time for yourself and for your own needs. Everybody needs nourishment in the form of food and water um, in order to, maintain your energy and be able to continue going. Movement can certainly support people as well as periods of relaxation and particularly sleep. Um, we're going to talk a little bit more about this idea of focusing on what you can do and not dwelling on what you can't. And I think in some ways that aligns with being realistic with your to-do list. Um, Help and having a community, particularly like joining in a supportive space like we are today, can also be really helpful, in particular because caregiving can often feel like such an isolating experience for a lot of people. So, one of the first things that I wanted to talk about that sort of underlies our ability to engage with self care or things that are supportive for us is that sometimes we can have some very complicated feelings and thoughts around our caregiving. And in particular, I think some of the most challenging thoughts can include guilt. Um, and this is just a list of, I think, some of the forms in which that guilt can show up for us as we're caregiving. So, feeling guilty because we don't think we're doing enough, or because we feel like we're failing, or because in the stress of having to give so much, we might feel like we're experiencing some resentment or guilt for wishing that we could take a break. In addition to that, there can be a lot of anger that comes up in caregiving, in particular, I think, because of the unfairness of it all. It can be really hard when you have a loved one who is managing with some kind of life limiting illness or has particular special needs that require a lot of attention. And of course, this guilt and anger can certainly interplay with each other as well. And so, some of the thoughts that can come up when these are some of the emotions that we may be feeling could include, this idea of like, I'm a mess. So, maybe if you're not feeling like you're not doing enough, or particularly if you're stuck or latched onto that feeling like you're failing, or maybe a thought literally like, I'm failing, I just can't do this. Um, when we talk about reframing thoughts, a part of it is about really supporting ourselves in anchoring in facts and the pieces of our experience that we also know to be true while balancing or recognizing it despite the feelings that may be arising. And so, with this idea that I'm a mess, we may want to consider reframing it into something a little bit more balanced, which is, I'm a human. Um, Humans are messy. Um, we are imperfect. And I think if we're able to speak to ourselves in a more compassionate way that just recognizes that, as opposed to the judgment that implies that we're not doing enough, or that we should or could be doing better. Um, I think that those two thoughts leave us in a little bit of a different mindset. Similarly, an idea around reframing the thought of I'm failing could include a thought instead that's something like I'm doing the best I can. Um, for me, I think it's also important with that sense of I'm doing the best that I can to anchor it in very specific pieces. So that includes I'm doing the best I can in this moment, knowing what I know right now, and with the resources that I have right now in this moment. So again, I think that it is so normal and natural that we have some really challenging feelings and complex thoughts that can arise from those feelings. And a part of this is not necessarily with the intention or goal to stop ourselves from those feelings or thoughts from arising, but it is to see where we can give ourselves an opportunity to treat ourselves with a little bit more kindness, um, or with a little bit more balance. In addition to that, I think one of the things that supports us in our ability to do that is really this idea of what we call our locus of control. Um, so there are things that are certainly within our control. There are things that we can influence, and then there are things that we can't control. And I think one of the really hard things is that when we have a loved one who is not doing well, sometimes our minds can take us into all three of these rings. And sometimes our minds will persistently focus on those things that we can't control. Um, I think that's really, really normal and natural. In a lot of ways, we just want our loved ones to be well. And so it's natural for us to go there. But I also think one way that we can support ourselves is in really being able to recognize what do I have control over right now in this moment, or that I can plan towards in the future. In addition to that, I think one of the other sort of challenges in the way that we think that can contribute to this as well is that we have a tendency to focus on things in the past or to try to project into the future. So we're either, rehashing the things that have happened before or trying to rehearse for the future. I put an anchor there because to me that was sort of a symbol for um, connecting with things as they are in the present, which I think aligns a lot with that sense of the things that you can control. Um, so, despite our wishes, sometimes we cannot control the things that have happened before this very moment right now. And although we can perhaps influence and create plans around things that can happen in the future, we can't 100% entirely control the future. And I think it's just important to acknowledge that, particularly when we're thinking about our loved ones, um, and the disease process or any other pieces of that may unfold. And so all of this actually had started in terms of that idea of like the quick tips for self-management. And again, like I said, it had turned into something a little bit deeper because I think while there are very practical tools around the aspects of control and information that I have here, I wanted to make sure that we kind of covered some of those underlying dimensions of what's going on. But here I have a slide entitled Control and Information. Um, because I think those are two things that can go hand in hand. Sometimes the more information that we feel like we have about a situation can also support us in feeling like we have more control. Um, and with caregiving, sometimes it can be really challenging to stay on top of just all of the different tasks that we may have in front of us, whether that be medication management or something around another routine. And so recognizing what tools you have in front of you, and so that can certainly include, different alarms or apps or other technology. Um, and with a sense of information, being able to, if you can, be curious and ask questions in partnership with a trusted medical provider to get the information that you need. So the example that I had here related to medication timing, just because sometimes our companions can have quite a regimen of medication, and depending on how those medications are written and like when they're prescribed, it can get really, really overwhelming. And so these are some of the questions that I would consider asking a provider to see if there is some way to simplify or consolidate a medication regimen for it to make sense within what you have as your capacity in the caregiving space. Um, and so that is the end of this presentation.